I knew something was off the second the community gate fob reader blinked red. My fob always worked. Always. I was at the Whispering Pines community pool before sunrise most days long before Darlene and her legion of Botox yes ladies even finished their overnight green juice rituals. But this morning the sensor on the west entrance flashed red, chirped twice, and then fell silent. I tried again. Nothing. A shadow moved behind me. HOA Security. Darlene's pet from enforcement. The one with the shaved head and mirrored sunglasses who thought a clipboard and a golf cart made him the sheriff of the cul-de-sac. He didn't say a word, just handed me a white envelope like he was serving a warrant. Inside, one sentence, cold, hollow, no letterhead. We're terminating your community privileges. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. I looked up, and there she was. Darlene Hargrove, 42 years old, polished, within an inch of her life, standing with her arms crossed like a kid, daring someone to challenge her at the annual block party. Her voice sounded like she practiced it in the mirror. We appreciate your service. The association is heading in a new direction. I handed him my fob and said just one thing. Tell your husband the board meeting in 2 hours and 45 minutes should be interesting. You'd think I would land. It didn't. She blinked like I'd spoken Latin, gave a smug shrug, and turned away before the gate even closed behind me. If you're still listening, hit subscribe and like the video. It really does help our team keep these HOA stories coming. 97% of you never do, and that's the only thing keeping this train moving. Appreciate it more than you know. Now here's what Darlene didn't know. She wasn't the first Hargrove to try trimming legacy weight. Over the years, I'd quietly survived 3 HOA presidents, 2 bylaw rewrites, and a 6-month beautification initiative that nearly replaced our internal compliance logs with a neighborhood app nobody ever checked. I wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, but I read everything. Every charter, every audit, every obscure clause the original developers left behind when they sold the last lot and cashed out. And buried in that mess, filed in a manila folder labeled in pencil by a man long dead, was Clause 11C, the Founder's Emergency Assembly Trigger. It had one purpose. If any key resident, those tied to governance continuity, were terminated without full board majority approval, a full emergency convening would be triggered. No exceptions, no president override, no executive committee veto. It was the legal equivalent of yanking the fire alarm on the entire subdivision. And I was still listed. 3 days ago, I'd quietly filed the activation papers, sealed, time-stamped, notarized through the internal courier to the chairman's private mailbox. I hadn't said a word. Not when Darlene was elected after her husband's golf buddy network pushed her through. Not when the outgoing president took his curtain call bow at the last potluck. Now when I saw the assistant cleaning out the legacy files without gloves like they were yesterday's junk mail. But I'd seen the direction things were heading. I didn't need permission to prepare. I just needed a signature. So while Darlene was off taking headshots for the HOA Instagram in front of her perfectly staged rose bushes, I walked to my car like I'd done every day for the past 22 years. Gray sedan cloth seats, one stubborn air vent that whistled like it was judging everyone. I slid and locked the doors and pulled the glove box latch. Inside, one black folder labeled in gold Sharpie. Protocol escalation. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't hitch. I sipped the lukewarm coffee I'd brought from home, then placed the folder in the passenger seat like a sleeping infant. Across the street from the shade of the community fountain courtyard, I could still see Darlene pacing through the glass lobby of the clubhouse, pointing, barking, swaggering in her pastel power suit. I watched as she waved off a member of the Rules Committee who held a printout in their hand. Probably my membership terms, probably the very thing her husband had once insisted be renewed without question every fiscal year, because God forbid the neighborhood lose its only person who actually knew where the original storm drain plans were buried. I had never asked for the role, never needed the spotlight. But I understood something Darlene never would. Power isn't in titles. It's in the footnotes no one reads. The charters, they ignore the documents they call outdated, because who has time for dusty paper when there are TikTok videos to film about perfect porches? That's where the levers are buried. And this morning, Darlene pulled the wrong one. She walked into the clubhouse like she owned the air itself. Darlene Hargrove, HOA president for less than 19 hours, strolled in my usual corner table with all the grace of a frat boy who just inherited the country club and thought bylaws were a coffee order. Taylor pastel blazer, no scarf Rolex, just loose enough to show she wasn't trying too hard. Behind her trailed her assistant. Early 30s, all cheekbones, and iPad. The kind of person who probably thought governance was an astrology sign. Miss Vance, she said like I was the dry cleaner who'd lost her favorite yoga pants. Effective immediately, your services as compliance guardian are no longer required. No greeting, no preamble, no thanks for holding the structural integrity of this subdivision together longer than she'd been legally allowed to vote. Just that smirk, the one people where when they think power is permanent and knowledge is optional. I looked at her for a beat. 1 Mississippi. 2. She was waiting for me to argue or panic or weep into my fob like some sob story from the last neighborhood watch meeting. Instead, I stood, opened my tote bag, and handed her the fob. Clean, intact, still warm from my pocket. I could see the confusion behind her eyes when I didn't say anything. No defense, no bargaining. Then I leaned in just enough for only her and Cheekbones' iPad lady to hear. Tell your husband the board meeting in 2 hours and 45 minutes should be interesting. Her eyebrows twitched. The assistant froze mid-tap. She covered it quickly, overcompensated actually. Waved toward the parking lot like I was a minor inconvenience that would sort itself out. Security will escort you out, she added, already turning away. Probably to post some big moves on day one nonsense on the HOA Facebook page. What she didn't know, what she didn't even think to check, was that my termination had already set something in motion. Like pulling the last brick out of a foundation wall you didn't know was load-bearing. Because 3 days ago, when her husband announced her surprise election at the quarterly strategy barbecue, I didn't panic. I read the filing. I reviewed my classification. I reread the founder's protocol, and I filed the trigger packet. Clause 11C doesn't care about Hargrove bloodlines. It doesn't care how many country club memberships your family holds or how good your lighting is in a neighborhood promo video. It cares about one thing: maintaining stability when power shifts hands too fast and too arrogantly. It was a relic sure written on legal pads and typed up on a Smith Corona in the late 70s, but it was binding and my name was on the list. Not because of nepotism, not because I was liked, but because I was necessary. See, governance isn't sexy. No one brags about regulatory schema or compliance inflection points at the annual Homeowners potluck. But when something breaks, when someone like Darlene skipped steps, suddenly all eyes turn to the one person who's been holding back the flood with duct tape and protocol binders. And this morning, Darlene walked into my corner table and cut the duct tape. Security didn't say much as they walked me out. They didn't have to. Most of them knew me. I'd written the internal review protocols for 3 of their last audits. One of them even mouthed sorry as we reached the parking lot. I nodded. No hard feelings. They were just following orders. That was the difference between Darlene and me. She executed power for show. I executed structure for continuity. As I stepped outside, the receptionist looked up confused. She watched me go like someone just shut off the power and didn't bother flipping the breaker. I didn't explain. She'd understand soon enough because the board packet was already in motion. The courier had delivered it, timestamp signed. Appendix A included a full summary of Clause 11C, a list of designated key residents, including myself, and a single-page cover memo that ended with one line. If any listed individual is terminated without board majority consent, a full emergency session shall be convened within 3 business hours. No delay, no debate. And the clock had started ticking at 8:01 a.m. Sharp. The air smelled like wet pavement and suburban ego. I didn't look back at the clubhouse as I walked. Let them enjoy their little performance. Security posture straight. Darlene giving herself a standing ovation in her own mind, probably already drafting an all-resident email about cultural revitalization and new aesthetic standards. None of it mattered now. because behind all the noise, something ancient had already clicked into place. I slid into the driver's seat of my gray sedan. The same one I'd driven since 2011 back, when gas was under $3 and Darlene was probably still quoting Pinterest boards like gospel in her interior design classes. The seat groaned like it knew I was carrying something heavier than usual. I sat still for a moment, hands on the steering wheel. The silence felt holy. Then I popped the glove box. The folder was exactly where it always was, flat black embossed with silver lettering that had started to fade after so many summers baking behind the windshield. Founders Protocol Escalation. Nothing fancy. No security clearance stamp. Just a folder no one ever thought to ask about. 3 days ago, I'd removed its contents quietly. No emails, no whispers, no trail. Just a sealed envelope couriered through internal legal routing delivered directly to the chair of the board's private mailbox on 18th, not scanned, not log, hand delivered by a runner named Marcus, who didn't even know what he was carrying, just that it had to arrive before 11 a.m. That Friday, I trusted Marcus. He had a newborn at home and a habit of triple-checking every delivery. The packet arrived. I received confirmation through back channel, not email, and that's what mattered. Inside were 5 documents. My membership agreement, original, and amended, highlighted to show active key resident status. A compliance audit memo outlining the association's failure to reaffirm 11C procedures during Darlene's transition. A notarized activation form signed and witnessed explicitly requesting emergency board assembly under Clause 11C. A single-page scenario brief titled Protocol Breach, Unauthorized Termination of Governance Custodian. The silver key fob trigger alpha that, when swiped through the board's internal governance terminal, sent a silent internal alert to the legal office and the chair simultaneously. Its job was done. I pulled it from my coat pocket and held it between 2 fingers. It no longer blinked. I slid it into the old ashtray and closed the lid. Dead weight now. The beauty of 11C was that it wasn't flashy. It wasn't designed for vengeance or theatrics. It was infrastructure like a fire door that only swung open when every bolt aligned. Founders knew chaos wasn't always loud. Sometimes it arrived in designer yoga pants and cut your legacy loose before the second cup of coffee. Clause 11C was their fail-safe. I was their fail-safe, and now the mechanism had been tripped. I didn't rush. There was no need. The emergency meeting protocol stipulated a mandatory 3-hour window from the moment of trigger. That gave me exactly 2 hours and 42 minutes to get to room 14C on the board level. Enough time to grab a coffee, take a walk, and let the system unspool itself. Darlene wouldn't see it coming. She'd assume sanctioning someone like me was a ribbon-cutting moment, some symbolic gesture to show she was cleaning house of all the dinosaurs who still cared about original covenants. She'd forgotten that governance is not ornamental. It's foundational. I wasn't the past. I was the lock they never thought would need a key. From across the street, I could already see the early stirrings of confusion. 2 people from the Rules Committee conferring near the glass stairwell. One of the board liaison staffers pacing with her phone to her ear. The calendar invite had just gone out. It wouldn't say why, just that attendance was required. Emergency session, no deferrals. The chair would already be reading the packet. And Darlene was still thinking she'd won something. Darlene spent the morning playing HOA President like a toddler plays dress up. Big shoes, loud gestures, and no idea what anything meant. The first hour was chaos by decree. She issued an 8 a.m. memo titled Streamlining for the Future, filled with cliches and buzzwords stapled to blind spots. 3 compliance subcommittees were cut. Teams that handled regulatory bridges no one else understood. She merged the Violation Review Board with the Landscaping Committee like they were apps on a phone screen, claiming it eliminated redundancy. She even proposed archiving all pre-2010 governance materials, calling them historical clutter. Retire them. By end of day, she barked, holding court in the glass bullpen like a game show host with executive authority. And all the while the residents clapped like it was a pep rally, not because they believed in her, but because she still signed the fine notices. At 9:12 a.m., the first sign of static slipped through her parade of disruption. Her assistant Lexi, clipboard still glued to her, like an accessory, paused at her screen. "You want me to decline this?" she asked, brow creased. Darlene barely looked. "What is it?" "Board emergency session room, 14C, 11 a.m. She rolled her eyes and waved it off like a gnat. "Ignore it. Probably some artifact from the old president's calendar. Legacy ghost meeting." But Lexi didn't look convinced. She typed something, then hesitated before moving on. She'd only been with the association 2 weeks, but she had the instincts of someone who'd learned how fast wrong moves echo up the chain. By 9:38, legal asked for clarification on a compliance freeze Darlene had imposed unilaterally, without routing through board counsel. She brushed it off, muttering about autonomy and modernizing hierarchy. At 9:51, one of the board liaison sent a private message to her husband. 2 minutes later, the outgoing president forwarded that message directly to the chair. And by 10:05, 2 board directors, neither based in-state, had landed at the executive terminal across town. One was already in a town car. The other texted a single sentence to the liaison. "I'm on my way. Clear the room." Darlene, of course, was still grinning. She just finished filming an internal video for the landscaping relaunch, talking about vision efficiency and how structure shouldn't be sacred. She posed in front of the Hargrove quote wall, not noticing that half the security team was watching the elevators instead of the screen. From across the street, I sat on a stone bench beside the old courtyard fountain, long disused. The water shut off after a leak no one bothered to fix. The spot was half shaded by a crooked sycamore and perfectly framed the southeast lobby glass. I watched it unfold like a slow, quiet play. A few hurried walks, a shift in tempo, that nervous energy when people start to realize something has snapped and they weren't paying attention when it happened. The chair's assistant Harold stepped through the turnstiles with a printed packet tucked under his arm, stamped in red. "Protocol response, 11C. He didn't look up. 10 minutes later, the board liaison left the elevator, her face pale. She approached the records desk and asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Do we have the signed original of the Founder Protocol Charter?" They didn't, because I did. The only complete signed ink on paper original lived in a fireproof case 2 feet from where I sat now, tucked inside my passenger seat under a bundle of old receipts and a half-melted chapstick. The version the board scanned years ago, redacted, the digital archive reformatted during a 2014 migration that simplified legacy structures by deleting all post-it note annotations and handwritten margin notes. But my mind still had the founder's fingerprints on it. One of them had doodled a little triangle beside my name with the word fail-safe scrolled beside it. The irony never failed me. Darlene was racing toward a cliff, and she didn't even know there was a map, let alone that she just set it on fire. By 10:22, Lexi pinged the board liaison. "Should Darlene be there?" The reply came back 10 seconds later, "Only if she wants to explain herself." Room 14C always smelled like fresh carpet and old decisions. The lights were never harsh, just soft enough to make you second-guess the stakes. No windows, no clocks, just the hush of money thinking about property values. At 10:58, I pushed open the door. 7 heads turned. No one spoke. The chair gave a single nod, the kind reserved for situations that don't need explaining. In front of him sat the black folder I'd filed, open pages fan like a legal autopsy. "MS." Bancy said, not rising. "Is this accurate?" I met his gaze without blinking. "Yes, sir. Darlene Hargrove terminated key resident status without board approval. Clause 11C requires immediate review and consideration." He tapped the edge of the membership agreement I'd highlighted in red. This was still active as of this morning. Reviewed and reconfirmed during the March compliance update. Page 6. Initial by your office. His mouth tightened. A faint twitch in the corner. Not anger, just calculation. The kind that happens when people realize something foundational just cracked and they didn't see it happen. One by one, the others leaned in. A few had their copies of the protocol printout. One director flipped straight to the signature page. Another was already checking timestamps on the filing addendum I'd couriered 3 days prior. They didn't ask why I was in the room. They asked why Darlene wasn't. At exactly 11:01, the final two entered. One was a venture liaison from out of state. The other was Darlene's husband. The former president didn't speak, didn't even glance in my direction. He stared at the empty leather chair at the far end of the table, the one with his wife's nameplate still gleaming like it had something to say. He looked at that chair like it had betrayed him personally. The chair cleared his throat and reached for the small brass gavel only used for formal votes and only when the bylaws demanded it. This meeting, he said, has been triggered under Clause 11C of the Founder Protocol Charter following unauthorized termination of a governance classified key resident without board consultation. He didn't need to say more. The room knew this wasn't about me. This was about what Darlene had broken. The chair turned to legal counsel. Do you confirm the filing timestamps and trigger authenticity? The general counsel, Ellen Vines, sharp as ever, nodded. All verified. Vance's classification remains active under Appendix G. Her removal qualifies as breach under Procedural Article 4A. Emergency session is valid. President acted outside prescribed authority. You could hear the oxygen leave the room. No raised voices, no panic, just the sound of lawyers quietly breathing deeper. The protocol had been activated exactly as the founders intended, without emotion, without pageantry, without warning. The chair turned to me one last time. Would you like to make a statement, Miss Vance? I shook my head. No, sir. The documents speak for themselves. I sat quietly in the visitor's seat beside the legal rep. I didn't touch the water, didn't open a folder. I was just their not reinstated, not repositioned present. That was enough. At 11:08, the chair made the call. We will proceed to executive review of the current president's authority in light of protocol breach. Voting members only. All others please step outside. I walked to the door without a glance at the chair. I just left. Just before I exited, I saw Darlene's husband lean forward and pinch the bridge of his nose. It was the look of a man realizing legacy doesn't protect you from consequences, especially when you mistake structure for sentiment. At 11:07, the door slammed open like it was auditioning for a courtroom drama. Darlene Hargrove swaggered in with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball in a glass factory. Oh, she said, grinning as she looked around the room. Is this about the dinosaur I sanctioned this morning? She expected laughter, maybe a few chuckle from the old guard and knowing smurf from the director, who once sat on a country club board with her uncle. But the silence that greeted her wasn't just cold. It was glacial. 7 sets of eyes stared at her blank and unmoved. 2 others glanced down at their folders, not bothering to acknowledge her beyond protocol. The chair didn't flinch. Mrs. Hargrove, he said, voice even. You violated the key resident clause embedded in the founder protocol. You executed a termination that per governance law required board majority consent. Darlene frowned. I'm the president. The chair didn't blink. Not exempt. Darlene looked around confused for half a beat. Wait, are we seriously doing this over her? She jabbed a thumb toward the doorway, where I stood still outside, listening with surgical calm. I didn't react. Instead, I stepped back into the room with quiet precision and slid a document down the table. It was already open to the relevant section. My membership agreement, annotated, highlighted. Clause 11C circled in blue ink. Next to it, a signature line. Her husband's initials dated 5 years ago. Darlene froze mid-sentence, her mouth opened then closed. General Counsel Ellen Vines leaned toward her, voice low but unflinching. It's valid, she said, and enforceable. The board is now obligated to assess your breach. She looked at her like she just flipped the earth upside down. You're joking. She didn't respond. She simply pointed to the gavel, now resting beside the chair's hand. Darlene's grin slipped like paint in the rain. You can't be serious, she said louder now. You're really going to hold a vote over this? The chair looked up. We don't vote because of her. We vote because of you. The air in the room turned heavy. Not dramatic, just final like the sound of a safe door closing. A staffer entered quietly and placed a small lacquered box on the table. Inside were the ballots, 9 total, embossed with board seals, each numbered and pre-folded. Darlene stared at the box like it had teeth. No speeches, the chair said. No posturing. This isn't a trial. It's protocol. Darlene turned to her husband, expecting something. Support, outrage, at least a glance, but the elder Hargrove remained still, staring at the table, as if it had betrayed him personally. You're going to let them do this, Darlene hissed. Her husband didn't look up. I returned to the edge of the room, not to gloat, not to hover, just to observe. This wasn't my moment. It was theirs. It was hers. The board began to fill out the ballots in silence. Pens scratching paper like quiet verdicts. Darlene stood in the center, unsure whether to sit, shout, or storm out. Her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides. That cocky smirk she wore like a family heirloom had shattered into something raw, something real. I watched it happen, like watching frost form on glass. Not loud, not sudden, just inevitable. The ballots went into the lacquered box without ceremony. One by one, folded corners pressed into velvet lining, each vote sealing a piece of Darlene's illusion shut. No one made a speech, no dramatic pause, just the sound of pens and paper, the scratch of protocol being honored in a room designed to outlast egos. Darlene stood like she didn't know where to put her hands anymore. She'd shifted from smug to stiff, that boardroom bravado calcifying into something smaller. She kept looking at her husband, who never once raised his eyes. The silence between them was louder than anything the rest of us could have said. The chair waited until the last ballot was submitted, then passed the box to Harold, who opened it with the quiet precision of a man performing a ritual, not a task. He read each slip in turn, not reacting, not even blinking, as he recorded the marks on a slim tablet in front of him. Then the chair spoke. 5 in favor of immediate review of President authority per Clause 11C, he said. 2 abstentions, 1 opposed. 8 total. All eyes turned to the 9th seat. Still empty. Darlene's the chair, didn't need to say it. A president who refuses to recognize protocol forfeits their right to vote under it. Her absence was a vote of silence. And silence carries weight when the rules are written in ink older than your last name. The room exhaled in unison. No relief, no outrage, just air returning to a space that had been suffocating under pretense. The chair looked across the table at me. Miss Vance said evenly, "Would you be willing to advise during the interim realignment period?" It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a compliment. It was an acknowledgement. I didn't smile. I didn't thank him. I simply nodded. Only until protocol realignment is complete, I said. Nothing more. Darlene flinched but didn't speak. That's when I saw it. The folder. It sat squarely at the center of the table, unopened but clearly placed with intent. White, thick, sealed, with a blue sticker from the Internal Governance Office labeled, in my handwriting, Succession Risk Assessment Confidential. I'd filed it 8 months ago, back when whispers first started that the elder Hargrove might be looking for an exit. I hadn't waited to be told. I'd begun tracking vulnerabilities, process gaps, policy drift areas where legacy protections were ignored in favor of optics and speed. And right there on page 17 was a full scenario walkthrough of an unvetted successor triggering a structural breach through unsanctioned termination of a key resident role. Darlene hadn't been ambushed today. She'd walked directly into a blind spot I'd flagged nearly a year ago. The chair didn't open the folder. He didn't need to. He simply placed a hand on top of it and said, "We'll reconvene in 72 hours. In the meantime, all executive orders issued since 8 a.m. are suspended pending review." Darlene opened her mouth, then closed it. The gavel tapped once, not to punish, to confirm. The meeting ended. No handshakes, no photographs, just protocol restored. They didn't even bother making it dramatic. By the following morning, Darlene's access was suspended and her nameplate removed from the president's office door without fanfare. A short internal memo went out from the board liaison. Effective immediately, Darlene Hargrove has been placed on administrative leave pending a procedural review. No accusations, no spin, just precision language sharpened by legal review and corporate regret. The real headline: nobody protested. Not a single department head sent a message of concern. No "we believe" in leadership email chain. Just quiet nods from people who had silently survived each of Darlene's impulsive memos. The same people who watched 3 compliance units get slashed and wondered what kind of future was being built with duct tape and buzzwords. Her husband never made a speech either. He just approached me in the hall outside 14C after the vote. Tired eyes, tie loose in hands, fidgeting with an old cufflink. "I should have looped you in," he said quietly. I didn't respond right away. He wasn't looking for absolution, just acknowledgement that legacy only matters when it remembers who carried it. We shook hands. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, the board did what the board does best. Reasserted control behind a curtain of decorum. All executive orders from Darlene's brief reign were reviewed, documented, and where necessary reversed. The merged Violation Review Board was disbanded. The compliance teams reinstated. The financial freeze on non-essential procedural tools was quietly lifted. And me, I never asked for a title, just clarity. My temporary advisory role was defined in 6 lines of legalese and signed by the chair himself. I reviewed structural frameworks, re-established the dormant audit triggers, and helped them recreate the continuity map Darlene had tried to delete. And then I did something more important. I chose my successor. His name was Luis Calderon, 27, background in operational risk degrees, in things no one puts on a resume, like listening. He wasn't flashy, but he understood the importance of being invisible in the right ways. He shadowed me for a month. Never asked for a badge title, just kept saying, "Show me where it breaks before it breaks." He was the kind of person who wouldn't need to be reminded about Clause 11C, because he'd already read it twice. I gave him the silver key on a Tuesday. No ceremony, just a quiet moment in the basement office where the founders once argued over whether to allow corporate dinners to be expensed. He looked around and said, "Feels like a nerve center." I nodded. Until someone forgets it exists. Outside, the world moved on. New announcements, adjusted budgets, fresh consultants, circling like sharks around rebranding efforts. But inside, something important held still. The board reviewed Darlene's digital transformation proposal, the one she'd hyped as the association's next big leap. It was filled with app mock-ups, glossy decks, and laughably vague timelines. They shelved it indefinitely. Not because innovation was bad, but because foundations matter. Because structure keeps things upright long after energy runs out. Because protocol isn't a relic, it's memory made enforceable. And associations that forget their memory, they become stories told by people like me. On the final day of my advisory term, I left one note on Luis's desk, handwritten in block letters. Guard the dust. It knows more than the glass. The sky was soft with overcast light. That pale gray glow that turns glass buildings into mirrors. I didn't plan the walk. It was just part of my new morning rhythm. Coffee from the corner shop 15 blocks through the old district, and then back home before the streets turned into inboxes. But that day, I paused in front of the building just for a moment. Whispering pines, still towering, still pristine, still pretending it had never once been fragile. The lobby looked different. Fewer badges, no crowd at the turnstiles. Even the energy felt muted, like the building had taken a breath it hadn't realized it was holding. And then I saw it. Taped neatly to the inside of the front window, just beside the security desk, was a poster printed on association letterhead. Clean font, balanced margins, no fluff. Quarterly training, understanding Clause 11C. Instructor E. Vance Room 6B, Thursdays 10 a.m. I stood there long enough for the steam in my cup to go cold. People passed behind me. New residents, maybe, or contractors. One of them looked up and followed my gaze, then gave a polite nod and stepped inside. I didn't follow. Luis was in there now, probably reviewing the new compliance overlays I'd left behind. He'd have added his own touches by now. better indexing, a digital clone of the founder binder, probably even a backup stashed off network. He was quiet, yes, but not timid. And unlike Darlene, he understood the weight of memory. A week after the vote, the board had installed a new president, someone from operations, with a background in procedural frameworks, not branding videos. There was no press release, no handover speech, just a quiet update on the internet with a bullet point summary of focus areas, stabilization, continuity, trust. The org chart was slimmer. The names were older, in some places younger in others. I recognized only half of them, but that was fine. I was never the name people remembered. I was the clause they forgot until it activated. Inside the lobby, near the reception desk, I saw the display. It hadn't been there before. A black pedestal-tempered glass, soft lighting from beneath. Inside it, resting upright like a relic, was the original founder protocol, binder, still scuffed, still faded. The label in my own handwriting, "Do not replace this copy." Still visible across the spine. No gold plaque, no explanation, just presence as it should be. I turned away and walked back into the neighborhood. No need to stand watch anymore. The silver key was in good hands. The systems would hold. And the people who thought structure was optional had already learned their lesson. Not through confrontation, through consequence. I crossed the street and took one last glance at the building. Now, just another glass box trying to do better. Institutions forget. Protocols don't.